All right, if you're using Airtable, one of my favorite Airtable features ever is the ability to create different views based on the exact same source data. So I'm going to go over a couple things my team asked me about this week, which is how do you figure out what type of view that you need depending on your process for your business. So we're going to go over a couple different examples and when you should choose each type of view based on just my experience. So what are some cool benefits of views? Number one is creating different saved views per task, which in Silicon Valley, they call the jobs to be done framework. So if you think about your business, you have certain needs that you want to fulfill from your data. So you want to see which clients haven't paid you yet, who's onboarding, who is like late or overdue. Your team has different needs. So they want to see what tasks they have to do by what time and see the source data. Your clients, maybe you have a client-facing view or want to have a client dashboard, they will have different needs. They need to see only their data, and you probably don't want to show them let's say sensitive data or anything that's incomplete. So everybody has a different job to be done with your data, and the ability of Airtable views is you can create different views per task. Now, this is what makes Airtable different and I think more useful than Google Sheets. So if you have a Google Sheet, you can have a grid in Airtable and you can have a grid in Google Sheets. But let's say you have two different people using the Google Sheet. If you change the filtering and what columns are visible and things like that on Google Sheets, and your VA looks at the same sheet, they will see the things you have, they'll see your view, right? But they need to do something different with that data than you do. So they need to filter it differently than you. They need to show different data differently than you. This becomes a really big problem when you have two different people looking at the same Google Sheet and like changing the filtering all the time. So Airtable allows you to have 2 or 3 or 4 or 10 different views for different jobs to be done. And in so doing, it makes it more useful, especially for larger teams than Google Sheets. So for example, let's say you have a VA who's in charge of your video agency, right? So editing thumbnails, publishing videos. You could have a VA view that only shows every single video for all clients that needs one of those tasks done, right? But you could also have a client-facing view showing all of their videos, the ones that are, you know, they need to film the footage for, the ones that are in the editing process, and the ones that have been published. So that would be a different job to be done. Okay, you can Google this. There's lots of really good resources on the internet on jobs to be done. Another one is hiding data that's no longer relevant. So a lot of people think Airtable is only for agencies that are huge or businesses that are huge. But let's imagine you have a landing page company and you sign, let's say you sign 5 clients per month and you do 1 landing page for every one of those 5 clients. Now, on your first month, you're going to have, let's say you have a bunch of, some people do this in Trello, right? They'll have a Trello board per client for all the things for the clients, right? Let's say you have a Trello board per client. You have 5 of them in month 1. But in month 2, even if you're no longer working on the first 5, you still have to keep those 5 around. You probably don't want to delete them. So now you have 10. And after 10 months, now you've got 50 Trello boards, which becomes really annoying to manage, but you don't want to delete them at the same time because then you're losing that data. So the benefit of having Airtable is all of a sudden you can still create the Kanban type Trello looking thing in terms of a mechanism, but you can hide the clients that are no longer with you, no longer doing active projects with you, right? So it can help clean up your data even if you're not at a huge scale, right? Just if you've existed for a while. And then the third benefit, and this is kind of a bonus one for the math nerds, is decision-making at choke points. So let's say you have you're a video agency, you have one scriptwriter, and that one scriptwriter is in charge of your entire agency, right? The question is, which script should they work on first? So if you have a bunch of clients, each one has, let's say, 5 videos per month, like let's say 10 clients, right? 5 videos per month. You have 50 scripts to write per month. Now, what script should you work on first? Right. I would argue, and we know this from working with a lot of video agencies, is that when they send the script to the client, it takes the client a little while to actually film the video. So I would argue that you probably want to work on the videos for the clients that have sent you all their raw footage first, because those clients are waiting for something to do. right? And you should probably work on, if you have to push something off, you should probably work on the scripts for the clients that haven't yet sent you all their raw footage. You should just kind of push those off a little bit, right? So having a formula in Airtable allows you to prioritize at choke points, and you can just rank or sort for those things to make your decision points easier. Another example is we work with a content agency that has one or two, now they have two QA people, and they have a bunch of different projects coming into this singular choke point. And they came to us and they're like, well, we need to figure out a way to tell our proofreader what kind of party they should have. And so we have a math equation here that's based on the size of the project, the experience of the writer, because less experienced writers would probably need more fixes done. It's not just based on the very simple deadline. Okay, so having a view like this and having some math equations that do this is really handy, because the way that Airtable views work, which is different than Google Sheets, is if the data changes in Airtable, it resorts itself automatically if you have a filter. So it makes these choke point decision-making things really, really handy. All right, so let's go on to some general concepts for views. Filters, when you should not use filters. So generally I tell my guys, if you have a new client, or if a client is not really used to Airtable that much, we probably don't want to filter at the start, because sometimes what happens is if you put in a filter, the client has this experience like the data has disappeared, right? Where is my data? It's gone, it's got deleted. They get all worried. So generally when a client is just starting with Airtable, when you first implement the system, I recommend to my guys that we do not use a filter right away, because some clients get confused, right? They think the data has disappeared. So after a while, after a couple of weeks after they get used to the system, and I would advise the same thing for your team, I would say use filters after people get used to it. And then another one is how to use filters. So keep in mind that different types of views can be filtered differently. So if you have linked data, so what you probably should do, where you have a clients table and a projects table and a team table and things like that, keep in mind you can filter based on any of those linked pieces of data. So for example, if you have a video agency, you would have your clients table, and you probably want to track the active or churned state of each client, and you have your videos table, right, where you track the status of the video. Now the question is, should you filter out videos? Like, how do you keep the videos view clean? Should you filter out videos that have been published? And I would argue, like, maybe you don't, but you should probably filter out videos even that have been published from clients that have churned. So there's, even if your team comes to you, or if you're working with a client, they say, hey, we want to filter out this, or they express a need to clean up a view, keep in mind you don't have to filter on the table. You could filter on other tables with a lookup field. Okay, and at the list view, type, which I'll show you in a second here, keep in mind you can filter in any of the levels of the list. So just because someone says, hey, I want to filter on this thing, doesn't mean that filtering on that thing is actually the most effective way to do it. So, and then the other one is should you create so we talked about kind of, this is like task specific views, right? Jobs to be done. This is client specific views. These could be client facing views or internal views. So one thing to keep in mind in terms of whether you want to have a client-facing view or not is views do have to be created manually. There's no API way to do this. So if you have like 10 clients being onboarded per day, you probably don't want to do client-specific views, but you may want to do like a client-facing view. So and that's one reason to do a client-specific view. The other one is, for example, if you have like an SEO agency where you have hundreds of articles in your content plan for an agent or for a client, you may want to do. We have clients that do SEO, and they pretty much always do a client-specific view, so that they can. It's easier to find stuff, right? Otherwise, you'd have one view that has 10,000 rows in it, which would be really hard to find. So that's that. In terms of types of views, when should you use the different types of views? So first off is a form. So just like a regular form, this allows users to enter data simply, right? Which is like, that's like the use case. Whoop. So should you use Airtable forms versus a different kind of form service like Typeform or Jotform or something like that? So the benefit of Airtable forms is if you're making a lot of changes to the backend data in terms of the information you're requesting from the user, Airtable forms can be really handy. So typically for onboarding, if it's a simple onboarding form, we would just do that in Airtable, except or especially until the process is more solidified. Right. This is also really handy for linking two tables together. So for example, we have a lot of clients that do cold email, and their inbox manager needs to record the fact that a call has happened or escalate an issue and to say, hey, I want to record an issue or record a call for this client. And this client is actually picked from their client's table. So in that case where you have to, or you want to have data on the form that's dynamically picked from a table in Airtable, it can be really handy to have an Airtable form. And of course, it's free. Other form stuff. So a kind of con of using Airtable is they look kind of basic. They don't look very good. You can jazz it up with some branding and stuff. But in terms of Airtable forms versus Typeforms, I think everybody would agree. I think that they look a lot better, have a better user experience. They're also Airtable forms are limited in the field types that you can do. So there's other form types where it allows you to have like GPS coordinates as an entry or something like that. So it's pretty cool. You can also do like credit card capture, and something like that in Airtable is not possible. I would not advise you capturing Airtable or credit card details in Airtable. Don't do that. And of course, conditional logic on things like Typeform is just better, right? So if you have a relatively simple onboarding process, I would go with Airtable. If you have a more complex need where you really want to do like lots of if-then logic, you probably want to go Typeform or something like that, and then just map it into Airtable with like Make or Zapier or something like that. The downside is if you're changing your questions a lot, you're going to have to be changing your code a lot. So something to consider there. All right. Kanban. What is this great for? So a Kanban shows, as you'll notice, a Kanban shows every single status, even those that don't have any cards in them. All right. If you contrast a Kanban to a grouped grid by the status, this is the major difference here. The grouped grid doesn't show, if there's nothing in that status, it just doesn't show that. So it compresses it, whereas this expands it. So what we use a Kanban for is if the client is used to using Trello. And what we also do is what we do with a client is we create what we call a company brain, which is a flow chart of their entire process of creating a video or a landing page or something like that. And so it can map like one-to-one to the process. You can see how each of these would map one-to-one here, which from a process perspective makes it really easy to model the Kanban as like a manufacturing process, like an assembly line. So Kanban is really great for like a VA-facing view. If you have editors or writers, because it can become self-managing. They don't have to go look up your SOP and go, what's the next step after this one? They can just see in the Kanban, when I'm done this step, I go to the next bucket, and that's my only job. So modeling like an assembly line is really handy. For Kanban, it's kind of models. It looks like Trello, which is kind of nice. And you can customize the data in these cards as well. You can show pictures, you can show links, you can show whatever you want. Anything that's in your backend data, you can show in the card as well. Okay, a grouped grid. So we use grouped grids for like the management view. So if this is the VA view here, the manager wants to see everything together. So if you imagine how hectic your Kanban would be if you had 100 records in this one, in state 40 here, right? You'd have to not only do you have to scroll back and forth to see the entire process, because your process probably has like 10 to 15 steps, you'd have to scroll up and down. So like getting a bird's eye view of your entire process becomes like really annoying. So we use grouped grids. And you could group it. Typically, we would group it by the status dropdown. The same one is here. There's some processes where there's back-end code that's running. And so you can also update the group can be grouped by like any kind of field, right? So this is great for like a bird's eye view of a status-based process for like your project managers, your COO, whoever it is. All right. So imagine a video agency with a lot of videos. If you have 3 videos, yeah, sure, Trello is perfectly fine. But once you start getting into like, well, I have the editor, the thumbnail person, the script writer, and I've got like 10 to 50 clients at the time. You can imagine how this kind of view here is really nice because it gives you that bird eye view, and you can, of course, hide columns, put the columns in different order than what is in your Kanban cards. Okay, and then so not only is this useful for the grouping by status, you can also do subgroups based on projects. So if you do SEO, you probably have a big content plan for each client where you have like topical silos is what is typical, right? So the groups could be those topical silos. And then for UGC agencies, what's typical is they have a creator who films like the video, and then the editor will produce like 10 to 15 variants on that video. And so what a lot of UGC video or a lot of UGC agencies want to do is visually group the variants by the creative. So what you would do is, like for this one is an SEO example, but like a UGC example is the same kind of thing. So you could do that. I have seen, by the way, I've seen people try to replicate this like grouped view in Google Sheets and try to automate it. It's a nightmare, but if you switch to Airtable, all of a sudden it becomes really, really trivial. So really cool. Okay, an ungrouped grid. So just because grouped grids are good doesn't mean you should always use them. In fact, we have a client who does a fair number of written pieces of content every single day, up to 100 or so, and they primarily manage things based on deadlines. So if your primary management metric is not status, but something else like deadline, you actually do not want to group because you're managing based on a different metric. So as you can see, if I zoom in here, right, so we have status still, but we don't group based on status intentionally because they need to actually hit deadlines. All right. So they have a team of 30 to 80 writers depending on the time of the year, and assign things. Some of the projects need to be followed up with first, and so that's the main metric, is things that are due first. All right. So that's that. Next thing is a list. We use lists internally. Lists are awesome because you can have multiple levels of lists. So internally we have 3 levels. We have our clients. Every client has a sprint every 2 weeks. And then for those sprints, we have multiple features, right? And so we need to be able to modify and see each of those levels. So a list view like this, where you have kind of a tiered system, is really handy. You can filter on any of the 3 levels, and you can customize what's shown in the kind of the first level, the second level, and the third level, and you can kind of just keep on going. Okay, and then cards, right? One of our clients has like a free service, like a free sample service they do, but that's an application only. They don't give it to everybody. And so what they have is they have these cards where it shows up as like everything that it's in the row, but it's all stacked together like this. And yes, you can customize the data that's in this card, but having things compacted like that allows them to more easily see all the information and like make a decision, confirm or deny on that. So that would be when you would go with a card. So the ones we didn't follow, like there's other views. There's like a Gantt kind of view and a calendar view as well. Maybe I'll do that as a part 2, but hopefully that gives you some value and gave you some ideas about what kind of Airtable views you should use. So that's all for today. Happy automating.